Listen to Persuasion by Jane Austen. Level B2. Oxford Reading University.
Part 2. You will find Part 1 here.
Later, Lady Russell came to Uppercross to pick up Anne. They talked on their way to Kellynch Hall, and Anne realized she couldn't bring herself to care about the affairs that troubled Lady Russell's mind. All she could think of was Uppercross. She cared much more for the Musgroves than for her own father and sister. She thought of Lyme while listening to Lady Russell talk about Bath. They paid a visit to Admiral and Mrs. Croft at Kellynch, and the Admiral kindly offered Anne to tour the house that she hadn't seen for many weeks.
"We have made some improvements," he said cheerfully. "We constructed a seating area in the yard and repaired the old furniture. You can take a look around if you like."
But Anne cared very little about the house. She declined the offer politely.
"We are going to visit some relatives up north and will be away for a while," the Admiral mentioned at dinner.
"This means that I am not going to meet Captain Wentworth at Kellynch Hall," thought Anne with relief that soon transformed into disappointment. Several weeks later, Mary and Charles returned to Uppercross. According to them, Louisa's health was slightly improving. The atmosphere in the house had changed significantly. It was lively again. Everyone cheered up a little after the unfortunate incident with Louisa, and the Christmas fire completed the happy picture. Anne never looked forward to reuniting with her father and Elizabeth in Bath. She never loved the feel of the city and kept delaying her departure, knowing that no one was waiting for her there. But Elizabeth's last letter aroused Anne's interest. Her sister reported that Mr. William Elliot had arrived to explain himself to their father and had been forgiven. Both Anne and Lady Russell couldn't wait to meet him after so many years. Together, they set out for Bath the following week. 8. Sir Walter and Elizabeth had settled in a neat house. Anne entered it with a sinking heart, but was surprised to receive a warm welcome from her father and sister. Soon she figured that they were only delighted to see her because they wanted to show her around their new house. They were wealthy again and paid due respect by the neighbors. They were not interested in Anne's time at Uppercross, nor did they care about Kellynch anymore. But they were extremely pleased with the arrival of Mr. William Elliot. Sir Walter talked to him once, and their former good relationship was entirely re-established. Sir Walter seemed to have forgiven Mr. William's faults from many years ago and was now happy to receive him at his house. Mr. William Elliot spoke very fondly of family bonds now. He came to Bath after his wife had passed away and had been staying there for weeks.
English courses, famous audiobooks for all levels, word games and rating charts to keep you motivated, all in one place. The Ava app. Don't just learn English, enjoy it.
Anne was puzzled. Clearly, he had nothing to gain from Sir Walter. He was apparently even wealthier than her father. But Anne knew he was a practical man. Something must have made him seek contact with the family after so many years of separation. She could think of only one reason for his unexpected arrival. He intended to marry Elizabeth. That very evening, he came to visit again. His eyes lit up with joy at the sight of Anne. They sat together, and he spoke to her excitedly about his impressions of Lyme, but most of all about the happy occasion of meeting her there. Lady Russell seemed very enthusiastic about Mr. William Elliot. She didn't see anything suspicious in his unexpected desire to reunite with his family. Rather, she regarded it as a wise decision. When Anne mentioned to her his possible interest in marrying Elizabeth, Lady Russell said briefly, "Elizabeth? Very well. Time will tell." 9. By accident, Anne learned that her school friend Mrs. Smith was in Bath. Anne had heard very little from her after her marriage. She was disturbed when she found out that Mrs. Smith's husband had died and left her deeply in debt. Besides, she had a severe chronic illness and could barely move on her own. Anne went to visit her as soon as she could. Mrs. Smith was happy to meet her dear friend after so many years. She had no husband, no children to love or take care of. She had lost her wealth and social status. She was in poor health, and yet, despite all her tragic circumstances, she wasn't depressed. Mrs. Smith possessed a flexible mind that kept her distracted from her desperate situation. She felt down occasionally, but her mind quickly shifted to the positive things in life. This gave her the power and the will to live on. Several days later, the Elliots received an invitation to dinner, but Anne had to decline it as she had planned to visit Mrs. Smith again. Afterward, Anne learned that Mr. William Elliot had been talking enthusiastically about her for the entire evening, praising her good looks and firm character. Lady Russell was convinced that he wished to marry Anne and approved of the idea. "Think about it, my dear Anne," she said. "You will be the mistress of Kellynch. You will have your mother's name and position as the new Lady Elliot. Isn't it magnificent?" Indeed, such prospects could not fail to please Anne. Mr. William Elliot was an ideal of a gentleman, well-mannered and sophisticated, but there was something about him that made Anne suspicious. She didn't think that he was being truly sincere with her. 1 month after she had arrived in Bath, Anne received a letter from Mary. She was delighted to learn that the Crofts had come to Bath. Mary also informed her sister that Louisa had returned home, and she was not alone. She was accompanied by one of Captain Wentworth's friends. The young man had proposed to her and had come to talk to her father. It turned out that they had fallen in love with each other while she was at Lyme. Anne's heartbeat grew rapid. An unknown feeling brought color to her cheeks. She was ashamed to admit to herself that it was joy. Captain Wentworth was free again. The next day, while walking alone, she ran into Admiral Croft on the street.
"Have you heard the news of Miss Louisa Musgrove's engagement?" he asked. "Her future husband is a friend of Captain Wentworth's whom she met at Lyme."
"Yes, I am aware of that," said Anne. "Hopefully it won't cause a conflict between the captain and his friend. If I am not mistaken, Captain Wentworth was going to marry Miss Louisa. I assume that their feelings have worn out on each side equally and without violence."
"No, Frederick was not at all offended," said the Admiral. "My wife received a letter from him the other day. There he expressed his sincere hopes that Louisa and his friend would be happy together. It was as if he never had any feelings for her at all. I think we shall get him to Bath soon and introduce him to some stunning ladies." 10. One afternoon, Mr. William Elliot took Elizabeth and Anne out for a walk. Suddenly, it started to rain, so they took shelter in a small store. "I will go find a carriage for you, ladies," Mr. William Elliot said.
"Oh, but the rain is so light," Anne replied. "Surely we can walk home." "As for me, I prefer to go in a carriage," Elizabeth said. "The rain will spoil my dress." "Then Elizabeth will take the carriage and we will walk. Right, Anne?" Mr. William Elliot suggested. Everybody agreed, and Mr. Elliot went to search for a carriage. And then Captain Wentworth, accompanied by a group of friends, entered the store. When he saw Anne, he turned red in the face. He greeted her confusedly and spoke to her, and she felt that for the first time ever, his cold politeness was gone. Soon the carriage drew up, and Elizabeth left. Captain Wentworth inquired why Anne wouldn't follow her sister. "I am going to walk home," said Anne. "Then I must demand that you take this," he said, handing her an umbrella. "Though I'd appreciate it much more if you let me give you a ride." "I am waiting for Mr. Elliot," said Anne with a smile, declining his offer. "He is to walk me home." William appeared the very next moment. He approached Anne rapidly, took her by the arm, and walked her toward the exit. She barely had time to say goodbye to Captain Wentworth. "Mr. Elliot is very fond of his cousin," commented one of the captain's friends. Several days passed. Anne had no opportunity to meet Captain Wentworth or hear from him. One day it was announced that a wealthy family from the neighborhood would be giving a concert and inviting guests. Anne told Mrs. Smith about the upcoming event during one of her visits. "Well, have a good time," said Mrs. Smith. "Just don't forget to tell me everything in detail afterward. I have a slight suspicion that soon you will stop visiting me as frequently." Sir Walter and his daughters were among the first guests to arrive at the concert. Captain Wentworth came later. His eyes met Anne's, and he immediately looked away. She approached him and asked,
"How do you do?" Captain Wentworth turned red in the face. Apparently, he would not have had the courage to speak to her if she hadn't greeted him first. Their conversation was awkward, and he became even more embarrassed. Then the massive door of the hall crashed open, and a crowd of people flowed inside. They separated Anne from Captain Wentworth and carried her to the other end of the hall, but she didn't even notice it. She was deep in her own happy thoughts. It was evident that the captain was still in love with her. During a break, she found herself in the company of Mr. William Elliot, explaining to him the meaning of the Italian love song that had just been performed. "I am deeply impressed, Miss Anne," Mr. Elliot praised her. "I have been told by many people that you are a decent, reasonable woman long before I had the pleasure of meeting you in person. You have inspired my interest, Miss Anne Elliot. I wish your last name would never change." Anne looked away embarrassedly. To her relief, William was addressed by some lady. Anne felt the urge to see Captain Wentworth. She found him in the crowded hall and went to talk to him. She couldn't help but notice a significant change in his manner. His face was intense, and he was clearly dissatisfied with something. Then someone touched her shoulder, and she turned around to see Mr. William's face. "Will you help me with another Italian song?" he inquired, and she agreed unwillingly. When she returned to the captain, he was already saying goodbye to other guests, though the concert was not yet over. "Won't you stay for the rest of the performance?" she asked. "No, I am not needed here anymore," he said, excused himself, and left. Suddenly, Anne felt very happy. No doubt he was jealous of Mr. Elliot. But then she grew anxious again. She had to prove to him that she had no romantic interest in her cousin. 11. Anne paid a visit to Mrs. Smith the following day. Due to her poor health, Mrs. Smith had stopped attending parties long ago, but somehow she learned all the latest news before Anne. "I heard that you've grown fond of Mr. William Elliot," she said. "Are you going to marry him?" "I'm not," objected Anne. "I would refuse him even if he proposed." "I'm glad to hear it," said Mrs. Smith. "You know nothing of his real character." "Is there anything you can tell me?" asked Anne with surprise. "I have known him for many years," replied Mrs. Smith, "though we aren't close anymore. My husband used to be a friend of his. This man has no conscience, no heart. He cares for no one but himself. He is a cruel, selfish being." She fell quiet for a moment, then went on. "I considered him my friend because of my husband, and we often talked. All that interested him was money. He was well aware that your father intended for him to marry Elizabeth. He also knew that he would be the heir of Kellynch. He looked for ways to become wealthy as soon as possible. He decided that the easiest way was to marry a wealthy woman. He was unwilling to marry Elizabeth because he thought she was poor. But he never loved his wife. Moreover, he encouraged my husband to live beyond our means. Pretty soon all our money was wasted and we got into debt. When my husband passed away, William simply deserted me. He was my husband's executor of will. If he had invested some of his money, he could have helped me get some of my husband's property after his death. But he did nothing. We haven't talked ever since." "But why would he return after so many years?" inquired Anne. "There is no fortune for him to win here." "Back in the day, he honored his title very little," said Mrs. Smith. "But now that he has the money, he also cares about becoming a baronet. He learned from his friends that Sir Walter Elliot had moved to Bath. He grew concerned at once that your father could marry again. If it happened and your father had a son, Mr. William would lose his right to claim Kellynch Hall." Anne just stared at her friend. She was furious. William had been lying to her father all this time, and all his romantic advances were fake. He never loved her, nor cared for her. But now that she had been warned, she could defend her family's reputation. She could barely stand the thought of him now. When Mr. William Elliot visited her the following day, she only looked at him with disgust. She was delighted to learn that he planned to leave Bath for a few days. 12. The next morning, Anne went to visit Mrs. Croft.
There she met Captain Wentworth and his fellow naval officer. The captain had to write an important letter, so he sat down at the table by the window. Meanwhile, his friend and Anne sat down on the sofa and started talking. The topic of the conversation was the upcoming wedding of Louisa Musgrove. "Do you know that Miss Louisa's fiancé was married before?" the officer asked. "His wife died not so long ago. A woman would never have forgotten her dead husband so easily." "It is not characteristic of women to forget the men they once loved," said Anne thoughtfully. "If their love is real, of course." Captain Wentworth put his pen aside and listened to their conversation. "Do you think it is easier for men to forget the women they love?" asked the officer. "Precisely," replied Anne. "A man's life is busy. He has his profession, pursuits, and business of all kinds. Women stay at home and live quietly, keeping their feelings to themselves." "I must disagree," said the officer. "Just as a man's body is stronger than a woman's, his feelings last longer." "Your feelings may be stronger," said Anne, "but ours are gentler. A woman keeps loving desperately, even when there is no hope." She was getting emotional and tried her best to hide it. Captain Wentworth stood up, saying that he was ready to depart. His friend said goodbye to Anne and left. Captain Wentworth hesitated a moment, then walked up to her, handed her a note, and followed his friend. Anne unfolded the paper with shaking hands and read, "I cannot listen to your conversation in silence anymore. Please do not say that a man's love dies earlier than a woman's. Do not say that it is too late to offer myself to you again, with a heart even more in love with you than 8 years ago. I was furious, offended, and heartbroken, but I have never been inconstant. I haven't loved another woman in the past 8 years. Give me one word, one look that would enable me to enter your father's house this evening, and I will do so with joy and determination. F.W." Anne's eyes filled with tears. She needed some time alone to think it all over, so she rushed out of the house to walk home. But she wasn't meant to be alone. Captain Wentworth spotted her across the street and hurried to join her. They stood on the busy street, surrounded by people, but were only aware of each other. They had always loved each other, but now the feeling was deeper, stronger, wiser. "I never loved Louisa," said Captain Wentworth. "I only thought of marrying her because I wanted to start a family. My pride wouldn't let me propose to you. I believed that because of the weakness of your character, you could be easily persuaded by others. But at Lyme, when Louisa hurt herself, I learned that you are a very strong, reasonable woman, but gentle and caring at the same time. When I heard the news that Louisa was engaged, I was more delighted and relieved than ever. I came to Bath for you. But your cousin, Mr. William Elliot, was here, and everyone intended for you to marry him. I feared you would refuse me again as you did 8 years ago." "Back then, I thought I was fulfilling my duty," said Anne, "but I would never marry Mr. William. It would have been against my principles to marry a man I didn't love." They parted to meet again in the evening, at Sir Walter's reception. "I used to doubt whether I was right to listen to Lady Russell and refuse you 8 years ago," she told Captain Wentworth as they sat together. "Now I think I did the right thing. You had no fortune and no stable position in society. If I had married you then, we would have both ended up poor and miserable. I would have blamed myself for ruining your life, but now I have nothing to blame myself for." "If I had come back to you 6 years ago, with a fortune and my own ship, would you have agreed to marry me?" he asked, and by the gentle look she gave him, he figured at once what she was thinking. "I was such a fool," he cried. "I wanted to do it, but was too proud. I'm the only one to blame for the years that we have lost. But now everything is set right. I know I will be happier than I deserve." 13. Who can be in doubt of what followed? If two young people love each other, they will overcome all barriers that separate them from their happiness and get married, even if they are poor or unreasonable. And if such parties don't fail, how should Captain Wentworth and Anne, with their advantage of reason, consciousness, and a fortune of £25,000, ever fail? Sir Walter and Elizabeth never opposed their marriage openly, even though they didn't seem too enthusiastic about it. However, Sir Walter had to acknowledge that Captain Wentworth was wealthy enough to marry the daughter of a foolish baronet who found himself deeply in debt. It was very hard for Lady Russell to recognize Mr. William Elliot's evil intentions. She had been mistaken about both him and Captain Wentworth. In the end, nothing mattered to her more than Anne's happiness, and she accepted the news of her engagement with courage. Soon, she even developed a liking for Captain Wentworth and became friends with him. Mr. Elliot was shocked by the news of Anne's engagement. He was very disappointed to leave Bath empty-handed. Captain Wentworth helped Mrs. Smith get some of her husband's property and paid off her debts. She was now his faithful friend and the earliest visitor in his and Anne's settled life. Anne and Captain Wentworth loved each other dearly, though their friends feared that their happiness could potentially be threatened by a war. But Anne was proud to carry the title of a sailor's wife. She believed that the men of the Navy were the most decent men in all England.
Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more free audiobooks like this. And now, listen to another English story